Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack. Welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about application development, deployment, and management at scale. The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor for these podcasts that we did from the Cloud Foundry Summit in Boston, Massachusetts. Cloud Foundry is used by enterprises around the globe to automate, scale, and manage cloud applications throughout their life cycle. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org. Hey, it's Alex Williams, the New Stack, here at the Boston Convention Center for the Cloud Foundry Summit, Day 3, I would call it. Right? Yeah, Day 3. Here they're all blending together at this point. And here with Molly Crowther, who was on stage on Wednesday talking about security. And I really would love to talk about kind of the changing face of security that you're seeing in the market. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in a summary of how you're really trying to evangelize security as a part of a holistic process more than anything else, you showed on stage like these different goals that you had met for security over the past year. And can you give us some context for that and what you were showing and what you were trying to say with that?
Yeah, so 2 years ago in Santa Clara, the summit was when Justin Smith kind of first unveiled like the 3 R's, which were the Cloud Foundry's vision for cloud native security, so rotate, repair, and repave. And I look back at his slides, and he had half a dozen things that we wanted to accomplish. And I thought that was a really good starting point for me, because I was really curious. Basically last week I wanted to put this slide together and see like what are all the things that we've actually done since last year, just because I think as the Cloud Foundry culture has evolved, all of these teams are realizing that improving security is really valuable to Cloud Foundry's customers. So I didn't even personally know about most of the things that have gone on in the last year. Like, it's really hard to keep up. So the point of that slide was just to call out for the community, like how much stuff we've done in the last year. And I personally think it's really impressive.
It is very impressive. I'm just looking at it as, what have we been up to since Cloud Foundry Summit 2017? And I was going to point out a few of these things I thought was interesting. One you say is CF release is dead. Long live CF deployment. What is that? What's that about?
Yeah, so CF release was the old way that the foundation and the open source teams in Cloud Foundry basically produced a distribution that could be used by the community. It was basically CF deployment is a simpler way of releasing that software to everyone, so that we can release more frequently and have fewer breaking changes as we go. So that was a big milestone for the team. It was basically like retiring Cloud Foundry 1.0 and moving up to a more modern way of deploying it.
Which speaks, to I think that modern way that has evolved over the past few years. Is there have been prior software releases, but now we're moving into these more deployment environments, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so how would you characterize, that as kind of a picture of what else you accomplished in the past year? What are some of those other examples of, of transition to this new security, thinking that we see with people talking a lot about security, for example, building it immediately, right into how the developers are working themselves?
Yeah, I think now as more services get added to Cloud Foundry, more teams are added. It's been interesting the way they have evolved in their thinking, because one of the things that we've been working on for years is making sure that all of the connections between internal components, all of that communication is done in an encrypted, safe way. And I feel like now when new things get added to the platform, it's assumed that, okay, we're going to do mutual TLS for this. We're going to keep all of these channels encrypted, where in the past it's been more like, okay, we're gonna put this together. We're not going to care about encryption for, like, as we release a beta or as we release. So I think that's been really great, that the culture has evolved so that people aren't kind of starting from ground zero. Like, they're starting with a much more nuanced way of thinking about security.
So with the introduction of the new Cloud Foundry container runtime, and the existing application software that Cloud Foundry originally is based upon, what are some of the transitions you've been going through over the past 6 months that are reflected in that, they're reflected in your security posture?
So I think in general, the application service is more opinionated about security, just as
how's it more opinionated?
Well, because you're bringing your code to the platform. The platform is giving you an operating system to run it on, and a file system in the container that's secure and kept up to date. Whereas in the container runtime, I think it's always going to be true that your developers are kind of responsible for bringing their own container images, and that's just a different abstraction between the two different runtimes. Is that the application runtime, you bring your code, we provide a very secure way for you to run that code, and then in the container runtime, you have to provide a secure container that we're then going to run for you on a secure platform.
So when the developer works kind of in that environment, how are you preparing them to think more about that container runtime that they're building themselves?
I mean, it's definitely more on them, and it's more on the person running the platform. We're hoping that using pipelines and automated deployments to be able to build those images is something that I think the Cloud Foundry community is very aware of, and very encouraging of doing everything in an automated way, so that you can take some of the responsibility away from them. But if you're running container runtimes, someone's always going to be responsible for creating the secure images.
Right. So how do you guys then, then how is it then done through the continuous development environment that is being now we're starting to see emerge, right? We've seen the continuous integration technologies evolve. We have, Jenkins, for example, as the mainstay of the market. But we're also, you guys talked about Concourse, right? And that's gonna force a shift into continuous development, right? Continuous, delivery. And with that continuous delivery approach, we're starting to see other tools like Spinnaker emerge.
I haven't heard of that one, but
Google Spinnaker.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right. So with that continuous delivery process, even if they are building out their own images, what is it that you guys can do to mitigate any potential security risks that may occur? How have you been preparing for that over the past year?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're preparing for is with the container runtime, being able to use the most up-to-date versions of Kubernetes continuously. So if you're running a container runtime environment, you want your pipeline set up to always be pulling in the latest from Kubernetes, and then they're able to help keep that part of the platform as secure as possible, if that makes sense. So the more we can isolate the containers that developers have to bring to run on the platform, the better off we are. So we can provide opinions on the level of the actual runtime and Bosch controlling everything. But as a developer, you still have to, at the moment, build secure images.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about your own distributions, right? When you're talking about keeping it updated all the time, how do you think about that then with other providers? I mean, because if there is truly a multi-cloud approach, there's going to be other providers who may not have the latest version of Kubernetes. How are you thinking about that incongruity? I think I pronounced that correctly. And incongruity. And how does that then, how do you mitigate for that? Because there will be instances where there's just a difference in terms of the updates that people are running, be it on, their own infrastructure or another infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, upgrades are always a hot topic in Cloud Foundry. I don't know specifically how the community is planning around the container runtime specifically, and whether there are technical challenges there. But I can definitely say that there's a lot of encouragement needed to keep everyone's distributions up to date and do that in an automated way.
Looking back then at some of the other things you accomplished in 2017, what were some of the more higher priority, some of these accomplishments that had the highest priority?
I think one that people have been looking at for a long time and working on for a long time is the multi-factor authentication for UAA, which is now available in the open source.
For people out there, what is UAA?
Oh, the user authentication and authorization. So Cloud Foundry basically provides a way for users to authenticate to the platform and to use that for applications as well. So they've built in multi-factor authentication using Google Authenticator, and the idea is that it's basically plug and play, that you could plug in other second factor authentication mechanisms as well.
And this is for authenticating what exactly?
So one thing that it means is that your platform operators, so the people who are actually operating the platform, when they log in to be able to make changes to how the platform's running day to day, you can set up multi-factor authentication for them, which is really huge, because that's it's basically saying making it more secure for the people who have to actually run your platform to be able to log in.
So what has happened in the past when you see a more dysfunctional approach where you don't have the multi-factor authentication?
It depends. Large enterprises are very wary about how they hand out credentials to people, who gets those credentials, and how they control access to the platform. So adding multi-factor authentication just means that I think people are going to feel a lot safer about having their platform operators log in.
So you also, in terms of this authentication capability, you also integrated it across Kubernetes?
Yeah, so I think
it works with Kubernetes?
Yeah, for the container runtime, there has been some integration with UAA, which is the user authentication for Cloud Foundry, into Kubernetes, so that it's a more seamless experience in the container runtime.
So with that, you are preparing, this authenticated environment for, the container runtime that you guys are building and developing. What are some of the other items on your list that you checked off in the past year? What are some of the items that you want to check off next year or in the coming year?
I might even have to look at that slide.
Yeah. Sorry.
Together. Is there anything in particular on there that...
You talked about UAA applying for OpenID Connect certification, how it works with Kubernetes, a single logout for applications. You also had instant security credentials for Diego. There's a lot of things here. I could probably go through. You probably, I don't know how you could ever remember all of these different things.
I definitely don't. I mean, one of the exciting things was TLS all the way from the Go router in Cloud Foundry to the application container.
Right.
And that's basically the router is what controls kind of the requests, all of the requests that go through the system basically have to go through the router.
Right.
So if you're concerned about someone in your network kind of sniffing the traffic between the router and the application containers, that's now always going to be encrypted, and it's not something you have to worry about. So I think that's one of the things with TLS encryption in the platform itself, is that we wanted it to be completely seamless for anyone operating the platform or developing on the platform. So when you spin up your Cloud Foundry, like, you don't have to worry about all of the, thousands to millions of internal connections within the platform being encrypted, because you just kind of get it for free.
So tell us a little bit about your job and what you're doing now, and how, how that will play into what you'll be working on over the next year.
So I think last time we talked, I was still working mostly on vulnerability triage for the foundation. So when people report vulnerabilities, making sure that the product teams are looking at them and fixing them quickly, depending on how severe they are. I've actually moved more into working with customers who are doing security assessments on the platform. So enterprise users of Cloud Foundry often need to either do penetration tests where they kind of try to break the system, or they just have to get their foundation past their security review teams. So I kind of take the results from those tests and work with our security triage team and work with the product teams to understand the findings, see if there are any compensating controls, and whether we need to make product changes or product improvements to help them pass their security assessments.
Excellent. So with the how do you kind of manage that, managing both kind of the application environment and the Kubernetes runtime on Cloud Foundry? Is there going to be, how are you feeling, what are the integrated security approaches that you want to focus on?
So I haven't had too much experience directly with the container runtime in the wild yet, since it's relatively new. We have kind of the different companies working on different distributions of it. So far it seemed that the important thing to think about when running container runtimes is a lot of networking. You want your networking layer to know what containers are talking to each other and kind of the traffic that's going on in the platform, and that's been, I think, the toughest thing, because Pivotal's solving that a particular way for our closed source distribution, but I'm sure the other member companies are doing similar things as well.
Well, that's a big issue, isn't it? How the containers are talking to each other. It's reminiscent of how virtual machines would talk to each other, but what are the different complexities between virtual machines and containers talking to each other?
I think it's just at a different level, and it's just interesting because the application runtime solves all of this for you, right? So Diego is a container orchestration engine, and kind of classical Cloud Foundry. As a developer, you don't have to worry about containers because we're doing all of that abstraction for you. So with the container runtime, instead of Diego, it's Kubernetes that's doing the orchestration. And it just means that since everything's BOSH deployed, the BOSH part of it is basically the same as classical Cloud Foundry, where BOSH is managing your VMs, spinning up VMs, killing them, depending on the health of the actual VMs. But when you get into the networking layer, just because of the way that containers work, and kind of the tenancy model of Kubernetes is a little bit different than Cloud Foundry. That's where all of the networking concerns come in.
This is where community becomes a real important factor, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The development of the container runtime has been really interesting because it's been spread kind of between Ireland and California, and it's meant a lot of kind of cross-pollination of a bunch of different teams that I don't think that we've seen before in Cloud Foundry. Usually they've tried to kind of geographically orient teams closer to each other, but it's been really interesting that kind of it's a globally distributed open source project, the container runtime in particular, with those teams working really closely together, but not often in the same time zone.
And that's different than it has been before with Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, I mean, the way Cloud Foundry is set up, there are teams all over the US. We have teams in London as well. But usually the teams try to isolate, because it's a microservices architecture.
Right.
You can isolate your teams geographically so that the teams in London don't, very, very highly depend on teams in California when they only have about an hour or so of overlap a day. So that's definitely been challenging with the new container runtime.
Well, Molly, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us. I would love to talk to you more about, the community philosophies that come with security, especially as we're thinking about security everywhere as opposed to security on a perimeter, right?
Yeah.
And how that kind of story is unfolding, but we can save that conversation for another day. Thank you very much for joining us. And,
thanks a lot.
And congratulations for all your success at Pivotal. So
thanks.
Take care. The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor for these podcasts that we did from the Cloud Foundry Summit in Boston, Massachusetts. Cloud Foundry is used by enterprises around the globe to automate, scale, and manage cloud applications throughout their life cycle. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Bakers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.